this is the story I need to share. This story of getting remarried and having a baby, getting pregnant, which was a miracle at the age of 46, is a future that I could never have imagined on December 22nd, 2011. And I was like, oh, and I had never asked Mike if he wanted to be in the book. So I went home and I was like, I knew it. Like, you know when you know, like, I just knew it. I was like, this is it. I came home and he was like, okay. I was like, and I got to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, because it can't be a lie. And, you know, even though we have a fairy tale, you know, story, it wasn't all a fairy tale. It was not easy bringing the three families together recently. For Father Richard Rohr, who we had in common of like, we're both Richard Rohr fans. But he said there's never any loss, there's only transformation. And really that is what the relationship is. So I had an earthly love, you know, of marriage and an intimate partner in Brian. And obviously that earthly relationship that we had to transform. And, you know, I actually, during the whole funeral proceedings, and I share more about this in the book, I was like, I felt like I was remarrying him. And I remember promising him, this is a little deep, but like at his casket side, that I was going to do everything that we were going to do together. And I really did not know what that was going to look like. I mean, I had met Mike. He was actually dating somebody else, but he decided to break up with her. And, but anyway, after I met him, but before we actually went on a date, I had this crazy dream that Brian was in. And I had other dreams where Brian was in them, and they were not good. They were like, he wouldn't talk to me. Anyway, they were not like comforting dreams. But this one, he was there, and we were at the San Diego Zoo. I'll never forget this dream. And he was standing there, and I was like, oh my God, Brian, I miss you so much. And I started crying, and then I was like dreaming that I was crying. I was like, no, go, stop. What are you doing? Go into the dream. And I was crying, and he's like, Eileen, you don't ever have to miss me. I am always with you. And then I said, okay, then what about this guy, Mike? And I did. I asked him because I had already met him, and I'm not joking. This is like a real dream. And and he said, Eileen, go for it. He did say, he's like, he used to be a jerk, but now he's a really good guy. I don't know why I remember that. He's like, he's a really good guy, and go for it, and I will always have your back. Okay, so that's crazy enough that I had this dream, and I'm bawling, crying. I wake up, and, you know, I've got chills head to toe. I'm still crying. Then Mike calls me about 3 days later, told me he broke up with a woman, and he's like, Eileen, I had this crazy dream about Brian. And I'm like, what? And he goes, I go, do you even know what he looks like? Because he'd never met him before. And he's like, yeah, I Googled him, I know, it was him. And he's like, we were at your home in Mexico, which he had never been to, but he was like, he came up with all of his friends. He was surrounded by his friends. And then he said to me, I want you to take care of my kids. And I want you to take care of Max. And he goes, but I want you to remember that I am Max's hero, and that he idolizes me. And we haven't even gone on a date yet. And I'm like, holy cow. Anyway, so there were a lot of really good signs that it was all going to work out. The ancient Celts believe the other world exists alongside our own. There are moments when the other world could permeate this world we consider ours. There are liminal instances and spaces, parallel universes, colors and objects and energies our eyes simply are not built to see. But if we slow down, breathe, believe a little in the mystical, we might be able to sense, if not see them. My story began before my parents named me. My name, Eileen, means the bright one, the shining one. And though I would never claim to be some magical enlightener, I do know how to hold a light for those in the dark. I know how to keep it shining steadily while everything falls apart. Genetically, I'm part of a clan that escaped a certain future and ventured into one that was uncertain and unknown. I've gotten hardscrabble to hope in my genes.
If you could share as an inspiration, what were those moments, those, where did you draw your strength from?
One of the things I did instinctively in the beginning after losing Brian was I treated my body really well. Honestly, because I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't drink coffee, I couldn't drink alcohol, and I was craving yoga. So I did a lot of yoga, and I really and I think I couldn't because if I drank I would like lose my stuff. So this is not to judge by the way, this is not to judge anyone on how they deal with it, right? And all in good time. But that was instinctive for me, and I think it created the clarity of what I needed to deal with. Because I think, part of the culture, right, is to ignore the pain and not deal with the pain. And I was like, I got to go head on into this pain because I got to get through this because I can't live like this. And I don't know why I did that, but I do recommend that. And someone shared with me a little earlier, like, sometimes it's too much and it's okay to take a break from dealing with it. But unless we deal with why we're so upset and what is causing all of the pain, it will persist. As my parents or my dad always says, what we resist persists. And even though we think we've gotten through it because we've ignored it, it just will come up in some other ugly way. So I think that was a huge piece of my work. And then there were things like I practiced yoga. I did a lot of transformational work through Landmark Education and other modalities. And for myself, one of the biggest, there was a lot of ahas, and I share a lot about them, but one of them that's coming to mind right now is like how attached I was, and especially attached to being Brian's wife. And in my identity, like who I knew myself to be. I was Mrs. Eileen, Mrs. with an RS, and Eileen Robertson. And like in an instant that was no longer possible. And then what? And I I had a lot of friends like Katie that I only knew through Brian and Jigger and others. And I was like, will they like me? Will they include me if I get remarried, or if I am happy again? Or there was a lot to deal with. What will people think? That was not embarrassing because we all worry about that at sometimes, but it was holding me back. One of the things I learned very deeply is that once you've been through something like this, you build the capacity to hold both. Because, I am very happily married to Mike. We have a great family. The kids are happy. And that does not mean that it wasn't sad that Brian, and it doesn't mean we don't miss him. And it doesn't mean that people's like, oh, if, would you go back in time? Are you glad that it happened? I'm like, what kind of question is that? Like, no. But it's hard for people to wrap their brains around holding both. And then my time in Chicago was really pivotal in my own personal growth. And I'm living in downtown Chicago, and Chicago is it is a tale of two cities, much like most major metropolitan areas. And one of my best friends that I met there, still by one of my best friends and actually business partner of mine, Melissa, we met because our daughters danced, as a lot of my good friends end up being my kids' friends' parents. Anyway, we danced together, and she lives on the West Side, right? Like she lived on the West Side. She worked in North Lawndale, lived in East Garfield Park. This is where the stories you hear in Chicago. That's where it's happening, and that's where she lives. And she's one of my best friends, and I don't live in that zip code. So we decided to have conversations of, we called it A Tale of Two Cities, and we decided we were going to invite our friends. And she would invite her friends and I would invite my friends, and we would talk about why is it this way. And it was really enlightening and growing, and I learned, and this was before the pandemic and before, just right before a whole movement in America. And I met through that some amazing people doing amazing work in Chicago. And one of the men I met was this guy who supports families that have lost children to gun violence. And I honestly initially was like, what do I have to offer? I talk about the polar opposite, right? Like in a private plane. I was like, whatever I can do to be supportive. So I would go and I just fell in love with these women. Like, they're like my friends now. Like, we probably are top fans on each other's websites. And what I love about them, and I do wellness workshops for them to physically help them withstand the grief that they're experiencing, and really to just be that support, because who they are for me is this unbelievable force of who's going to transform the violence in Chicago. And they're not going to do it alone. They're going to do it in partnership with me. And all of us, right? So it's not like a them problem. It's not a me problem. It's not my job. It's not their, it's like, no, this is our community. This is our community. We need to take action. And if I'm good at teaching you some yoga to breathe so you can go to the State House and advocate for, better gun laws, then I will teach you yoga and teach you to breathe and be there for you when you need me.
Something that's come out of it that you have created beauty from. What's one thing?
They asked me that on the television, and I was like, one thing. Okay, what's there for me right now is forgiveness, and in the journey of loss, it's ugly, especially when it's unexpected. It can be beautiful too, but sometimes they're ugly pieces. And I think, writing this book, people are like, oh, was that really therapeutic? And I was like, it actually really was, because, I did not do everything right. I share what I didn't do well. I share what worked, what didn't work. But when I was writing it, like I made mistakes. Like, I've said really awful things to my kids, and I hold on to that, and I like beat myself up sometimes too much about that. And when I was writing that, I was like, oh my God, Eileen, no wonder you did that. Like you were grieving too. Like I have this like persona, like I need to keep it all together. And so forgiving myself was key too. And so being able to just hold compassion and forgiveness in this thing called life that sometimes throws us things we don't want.